Welcome again to Math 800 Pre-Algebra. Today we are doing section 2.5, solving equations with several steps. Our objectives. 1. To solve equations using the addition and division properties of equality. 2. To simplify equations using the distributive addition and division properties. Solving an equation using the addition and division properties. Step 1. You're going to add the same amount to both sides of the equation so that the variable term, that's the part with the letter, ends up by itself on one side of the equal sign. It does not matter whether it's on the left side or the right side, as long as you have a variable on one side and the constants on the other. Then you're going to divide both sides by the coefficient of the variable term to find the solution. Your end goal is to have a coefficient of a positive 1. So you want your answer to be x equals a number or a number equals y. Lastly, check the solution by going back to the original equation. Example. Solve the equation 5m plus 1 equals 16. Check the solution. So, step 1, we want to get the variable term, the 5m, by itself. Imagine Imagine a fence along the equal sign. Your goal is to get the variable term, the 5m, by itself on one side of the fence. So we need to remove this positive 1. What can we add to both sides to get rid of the positive 1? Remember, we have to keep our balance. So if we're going to do something to the left side of the fence or the left side of the equal sign, we need to do the same thing to the right. So we're going to add the same amount to both sides. Well, if we add a negative 1 to the left, we'll have to add a negative 1 to the right, and we get 5m plus 0 equals 15. Remember, your goal was to eliminate this positive 1. Adding a negative 1 turns it into 0, and anything plus 0 is just itself. So 5m plus 0 is simply 5m. Now this equals 15. Step 2 is to get a coefficient of 1. So this is 5 times m. Remember, when there is no symbol written here, there's actually multiplication. So this is 5 times m. If our goal is to get this to be a 1, we need to divide both sides by the same thing, namely the coefficient. So if I divide both sides by 5, 5 divided by 5 will be 1. So I'll just have a 1m. Remember, in math, we don't write the 1 if it's the coefficient. We just leave the letter. And we had to do it to both sides, so 15 divided by 5 is 3. Lastly, we need to check the solution. We are going to replace the m with our solution of 3. Then check it. 5 times 3 is 15. 15 plus 1 is 16. Note, this is just your check. The solution was 3. Your answer is 3. This is just checking to see if your answer worked. Example. Solve the equation 2x minus 2 equals 5x minus 11. Our first goal is to get the x term on one side. It does not matter whether you go to the left or whether you go to the right. In this case, we are choosing to add a negative 5x to both sides. Again, you have to do it to both sides because we're going from one side of the fence to the other. So 5x minus 5x is 0, minus 11. And then 2x minus 5x is negative 3x, minus 2. We can rewrite, if it is helpful, you can rewrite a subtract 2 as adding a negative 2. As you move up in mathematics and in most of your science classes and any business or econ classes, your teachers will write subtract 2, but they often say negative 2, because in their mind, they know that when you subtract a 2, that is the same as adding a negative 2. So they're thinking this, even though they never write it down. Here, 0 minus 11 is negative 11. Our goal is to get this negative 3x by itself on the left side of the equal sign. So since this is a negative 2, I'm going to add a positive 2 to both sides. And again, you have to do it to both sides. That's the basis of all of algebra, that you do it to both sides. So a negative 2 and a positive 2 is 0. Negative 11 and positive 2 is negative 9. Again, negative 3x plus 0 is simply negative 3x. That's why we chose to do this. Most people don't write these zeros. That's okay as long as you're getting the right answer. Now we have negative 3x equals negative 9. We need to divide both sides by a negative 3. That will give us a positive 1 for a coefficient. So I divide both sides by negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is a positive 1. Again, we do not write that. And negative 9 divided by negative 3 is 3. Our answer is x equals 3. If we checked this, we would plug it back into the original. On the left, I'd have 2 times 3, which is 6, and 6 minus 2 is 4. On the right, I'd have 5 times 3, which is 15, and 15 minus 11 is 4. So both of them check out to 4. Hence, our answer of 3 is the correct solution. A note: more than one sequence of steps will work to solve complicated equations. The basic approach is the following. Simplify each side of the equation if possible. Simplifying are doing things like using the distributive property or combining like terms. Once you have done that, you want to get the variable term by itself on one side and the number part or the constant on the other side. Once you have the variable term on one side and the constants on the other, you divide both sides by the coefficient of the variable term. These are your 3 steps. Example: solve the equation negative 6 equals 3 parenthesis y minus 2 parenthesis. Check the solution. Our first step is to use the distributive property to rewrite the equation. Remember that when you have a 3 outside these parentheses, this is a multiplication. The big thing to be careful about is you need to be doing this over an addition or subtraction. Had this been a multiplication, you cannot distribute. It is only when you have an addition or a subtraction. So we distribute and we get 3 times y and 3 times 2. 3 times y is 3y and 3 times 2 is 6. You do not have to write this step, though I find drawing the arrows is helpful. I still draw my arrows. So, once we've used the distributive property, we now have a new equation. Well, not a new equation, a equation that looks different. It looks like negative 6 equals 3y minus 6. These two equations are the same. This one has been factored, and this one has been this one has been factored, and this one has been multiplied out. We have used the distributive property. If you need to, rewrite the subtract 6 is adding a negative 6. Again, most teachers and most people just internalize this step, but if you need to write it down, that's fine. We're going to add 6 to both sides because our goal is to get this 3y term by itself. When we add a positive 6 to both sides, I get 0 equals 3y. Sorry. It is okay to get 0. That's perfectly fine. It is a number. It is the number in between negative 1 and positive 1, and it's an okay answer here. Our goal is to get the y to have a positive 1 as a coefficient, so I'm going to divide both sides by that 3, by the coefficient. 0 divided by 3 is fine. Remember, you can't divide by 0, so this number on the bottom cannot be 0, but 0 can be on the top. And we get 0 equals y as our solution. We can check that by replacing y with 0. 0 minus 2, 0 plus negative 2 is just negative 2. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, and so it is correct. Notice the solution is 0, not negative 6. That's just your check. So here are the formal steps for solving an equation. Step 1. If possible, use the distributive property to remove parentheses. Step 2. Combine any like terms on the left side of the equation and combine any like terms on the right side of the equation. Be very careful. When you're combining like terms, you don't change the signs. You're just combining things on one side of the equation with one another, and you're combining things on the other side of the equation. You're not changing signs. Step 3 is to add the same amount to both sides of the equation so that the variable term ends up by itself on one side of the equal sign, and the number term, or the constant, is by itself on the other side. You may have to do this step more than once. So you might have to first move the variable part and then move the constant part. Step 4, divide both sides by the coefficient of the variable term to find the solution. And lastly, step 5, check your solution by going back to the original equation. Replace the variable with your solution and then follow the order of operations to complete the calculations. If the two sides of the equation balance, your solution is correct. This, I generally, when you're doing Math Excel, or I'm sorry, My Math Lab, you don't have to worry about this because it automatically checks it for you. However, on your quizzes and on your test, it is nice to check your answer before you turn it in to see if you're right or not. Example. Solve the equation 8 plus 5 parenthesis m plus 2 parenthesis equals 6 plus 2m. Check the solution. Step 1. Use the distributive property. We're going to distribute the 5 to these parentheses. I get 8 plus 5m plus 10 equals 6 plus 2m. Step 2. combine like terms on the left side. The 8 and the 10 are like terms, they're both constants. So 8 plus 10 is 18. The 5m is still there, and the 6 plus 2m is still there. Now we need to get the variable term on one side and the constant on the other. So that's step 3. We're going to add a negative 2m to both sides. 5m minus 2m is 3m plus 18. That just stays there, equal stays there, 6 stays there, and 2m minus 2m, or a 2m plus a negative 2m, is 0. We just rewrite that as 6 then, since 6 plus 0 is 6. Now we want to get this 3m by itself, so we're going to add a negative 18 to each side. We get 3m plus 0 equals negative 12. Again, 3m plus 0 is just 3m equals negative 12. And lastly, well, not lastly, but lastly, to get the actual solution, divide both sides by 3, and we get m equals negative 4. The very last step is to check that answer. We're going to replace the m with our solution, right? Our solution was negative 4. We're going to replace the m's with negative 4, then follow order of operations. Here we're going to get negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. Here we're going to have 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. Here we're going to get 8 plus negative 10. Here we get negative 2, and then finish the left, we get negative 2 equals negative 2. Our solution is negative 4. Our check shows that we're correct. That concludes section 2.5. Your next steps are to complete the worksheet for section 2.5. This is worksheet 13. Then you will check the key for worksheet 13 in D2L, or if you're in my face-to-face class, we will go over it in class. Then you will complete the online homework for section 2.5 through my math lab. And lastly, complete and submit chapter quiz 2. Then you will start on section 3.1.